The cantina was dark and filled with smoke from a dozen different alien species. Zolthek sat at a corner table, his forearms wrapped around a large mug of fermented kelp juice. 3 young Kethri soldiers sat across from him, their green scales still bright with youth. It asked him about the war, about why everyone spoke of humans in whispers. Zolthek set down his drink and looked at each of them with his black eyes. You want to know about humans? I will tell you about Jake Morrison and what happened at Kepler Station. After this story, you will understand why we fear them. The old warrior leaned back in his chair. His battle scars caught the dim light as he began to speak. It was during the 2nd year of the war. The Veltar Empire thought they were smart. They had surrounded Kepler Station with 50 ships. The station was important because it controlled the shipping lanes to 3 different star systems. Whoever held it could control trade in that entire sector. One of the young soldiers shifted in his seat. How many humans were on the station? Only 300, Zolthek said. Most were civilians. Workers, engineers, families. The military force was just 37 soldiers led by Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison. The Veltar had over 2,000 warriors ready to board the station. Cantina noise faded as other patrons began to listen. Stories about humans always drew a crowd. The Veltar commander sent a message to Morrison, said surrender now, and no one would be hurt. The humans would be taken as prisoners and treated well. Morrison sent back a 2-word reply. Zolthek paused and took another drink. He said, come take it. The young Kethri looked confused. One asked, but they were outnumbered. Why did they not surrender? That is what makes humans dangerous, Zolthek replied.
Zolthek replied,
we do not think like we do. We fight when we can win.
Oh, baby.
They fight because they choose to fight. Psst, the Veltar thought. The siege would last maybe 1 week, cut off their supplies, wait for them to get hungry, and they would give up. Zolthek's voice grew darker. The siege lasted 93 days. The old soldier continued his story. Morrison knew he could not win a direct fight. So he did what humans do best. He changed the rules of the game. He divided his soldiers into teams of 3 or 4, sent them into the maintenance tunnels that ran through the station walls. The station was built for mining operations decades ago. It had hundreds of tunnels and shafts that the Veltar did not know about. Morrison had his people study every tunnel, every vent, every hidden passage. They turned the entire station into a maze that only they understood. One young soldier asked, what about food and water? That was the worst part, Zolthek said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. After the first week, they ran out of real food. They mixed protein paste with recycled water. Sometimes they ate emergency rations that were 10 years old. The children got the best food. The soldiers ate whatever was left, but they kept fighting.
Ow.
Every night, Morrison's teams would crawl through the tunnels. They would pop out behind Veltar patrols and attack with knives and clubs. Sometimes they used tools from the mining equipment. They would kill 2 or 3 Veltar and then disappear back into the tunnels. The cantina had gone completely quiet now. Even the bartender had stopped cleaning glasses to listen. Veltar started to get nervous. They were losing soldiers every night, could not catch the humans. Tried to seal the tunnels, but there were too many. They tried to flood sections with gas, but the humans had breathing masks from the mining operations. Up and walked to the bar. He ordered another drink and came back to the table. By the 3rd week, the Veltar were afraid to patrol alone. They moved in groups of 10 or more, but it did not matter. Humans kept coming. Morrison was smart. He knew his people were getting weak from lack of food and sleep. So he organized them into shifts. While one team rested, another team hunted. While one team ate, another team planned the next attack. He made sure everyone got some sleep, even if it was only 2 or 3 hours. The humans started using psychological warfare too. It would leave messages written in Veltar blood on the walls. It would hide Veltar weapons in places where patrols would find them, making the Veltar think their own soldiers were turning against them. One of the young Kethri soldiers looked sick. How long could they keep this up? That is what the Veltar commander wanted to know, Zolthek replied. After 6 weeks, he sent another surrender demand. Morrison sent back a picture of his weapon. With 47 marks carved into the stock, Each mark was a Veltar soldier he had personally killed. The Veltar tried boarding the station 3 times. Each time they lost more soldiers than they could afford. The humans knew every corridor, every room, every hiding place. They would let the Veltar get deep into the station, then attack from behind and cut off their escape routes. Zolthek's voice grew quieter. I was there for the final assault. I was a young warrior then, eager to prove myself. We thought we would finally overwhelm them with pure numbers. Morrison had prepared for this. He had moved all the civilians to the center of the station, behind blast doors and force fields. His soldiers were spread throughout the outer sections, hidden and waiting. When we came through the airlocks, everything seemed quiet. Too quiet, we should have known it was a trap. The old warrior paused and rubbed one of his scars. Humans had rigged explosives throughout the docking bays. As soon as our ships locked on, Morrison blew the charges. Half our assault force was killed or trapped in the wreckage, but we kept coming. Had to. Our commander had staked his reputation on taking the station. We fought room by room, corridor by corridor. Every time we thought we had cleared a section, humans would appear behind us from hidden passages. Morrison was everywhere. Soldiers would report seeing him in 3 different sections at the same time. He seemed to know exactly where we were and where we were going. Later, I learned he had set up a communication network using the station's maintenance systems. His people could talk to each other without us hearing them. Zolthek finished his drink and set the mug down hard. The battle lasted 18 hours. By the end, we had lost over 800 warriors. The humans lost 23 soldiers. But the worst part was Morrison himself. During the final hour when we cornered him in the command center, he was still calm, still giving orders, still fighting. He'd been awake for 4 days straight. He'd been wounded 3 times. His uniform was torn and bloody, but he never stopped. I was the one who finally faced him. He looked at me with those human eyes, not angry, not afraid, just determined. He had run out of ammunition for his rifle, but he kept fighting with a metal bar he had torn from a wall panel. When our reinforcements finally arrived and we retreated, Morrison was still standing, still ready to fight. The relief fleet that came to help the humans found him collapsed in his chair, unconscious. From exhaustion, but he had won. The station was still in human hands. The young soldiers sat in stunned silence. Finally, one asked what happened to Morrison. Zolthek smiled grimly. He was promoted and given command of a battleship. Last I heard he was. Still fighting somewhere on the front lines. Still refusing to surrender. Still teaching other species that humans do not know how to quit. The old warrior stood up and prepared to leave. That is why we fear humans. Not because they are stronger or smarter than us, but because they never stop. When we would give up, they keep fighting. When we would negotiate, they keep attacking. When we would retreat, they follow us home. As Zolthek walked toward the door, he turned back one last time. Remember this story when you meet humans in battle? They are not like us. They do not fight to win. They fight because fighting is what they do. The cantina remained quiet long after the old warrior had left. The next evening, the 3 young Kethri soldiers returned to the cantina. They had spent all day thinking about Morrison and the siege of Kepler Station. When they saw Zolthek sitting at the same corner table, they quickly joined him. Us another story, one of them said eagerly. Tell us more about humans. Zolthek looked at their bright green faces and nodded slowly. Very well. Tonight I will tell you about Lisa Carter. This story happened on Verdania, the jungle world in the Outer Rim. It will show you that humans are dangerous even when they are alone. The old warrior ordered his drink and settled back in his chair. Other aliens in the cantina moved closer when they heard he was telling another human story. Lisa Carter was a medic, Zolthek began. She was not a fighter like Morrison. Job was to heal people, not kill them. She carried medical supplies instead of weapons. She was small, even for a human, maybe 55 kilos. The Scray hunters who captured her squad probably thought she would be easy prey. One of the young soldiers asked, "What were they doing on Verdania?" "Reconnaissance mission," Zolthek replied. The humans wanted to know if the Scray were building a base there. Carter's unit was 12 soldiers led by Sergeant Danny Wright. They were supposed to watch and report back. Simple mission, Zolthak took a long drink. But the Scry are master hunters. They know the jungle better than any species in the galaxy. They can track a mouse through a rainstorm. They can smell fear from a kilometer away. They set a trap for the human patrol. The humans walked right into it. The Scry had been watching them for 2 days. They knew exactly where the patrol would go. They surrounded them in a clearing near a river. 11 humans were captured. Only Carter escaped. How did she get away? Young soldier asked. She was checking the rear when the attack happened. She heard the fighting and hid behind a fallen tree. She watched through her scope as the Scry tied up her friends and dragged them away. She could have called for help. She could have reported back to base. Instead, she followed them. Zolthek's voice grew quiet. The Scry took the prisoners to 3 different camps spread throughout the jungle. They separated them so rescue would be impossible. Each camp had 20 or 30 Scry warriors. The camps were connected by jungle paths that only the Scry knew. Carter followed them for 6 days. She never got closer than 500 meters. She learned their patrol schedules. She watched how they moved through the jungle. She studied their weapons and their habits. She ate nothing but emergency rations and drank water from streams. On the 7th day, she began her rescue operation. The cantina fell silent. Even the background music seemed quieter. She started with the smallest camp. 4 human prisoners guarded by 23 Scry. Carter waited until the middle of the night. She used her medical knowledge to make poison from jungle plants. She put it in their water supply. She did not want to kill them all, just make them sick. While half the guards were vomiting, she created a distraction. She threw rocks to make noise on one side of the camp. When the healthy guards went to investigate, she attacked from the other side. Zolthek paused and looked around the cantina. Remember, she was a medic? She knew exactly where to hit to cause maximum damage without killing. She used a stun weapon taken from the first guard she knocked out. In 10 minutes, she had freed her 4 teammates. But instead of escaping, she told them to wait in the jungle. She was going after the others. One of the young Kethri looked confused. Why did she not take her rescued soldiers with her? Because Carter understood something the Scry did not, Zolthek explained. They expected a rescue force. They were watching for ships and large groups of soldiers. They were not watching for one small human moving alone through their territory. Hit the second camp 3 days later. This one had 5 prisoners and 30 guards. This time she used different tactics. She studied their patrol routes and found a weakness. The Scry guards changed shifts every 4 hours. But there was a 10-minute gap when one section was not being watched. Carter used that gap to get inside the camp. She did not attack the guards. Instead, she sabotaged their equipment. Cut communication lines. She damaged their vehicles. She put sleeping drugs in their food. When the guards started falling asleep at their posts, she moved in. She freed the 5 prisoners and led them through the jungle to meet the first group. Now she had 9 soldiers with her, but she was still not done. Zolthek took another drink. His hands were shaking slightly as he remembered. The 3rd camp was the largest. It held Sergeant Wright and 2 other soldiers. It also had 50 Scry warriors and their war chief, a massive creature named That Score. He was 3 meters tall and had killed more enemies in single combat than any other Scry alive. Carter spent 2 more days watching this camp. She knew she could not use the same tricks. The other camps had probably reported their problems by now. The Scry would be expecting an attack. So she decided to challenge That Score directly. The young soldiers gasped. One of them said a human medic challenged a Scry war chief. They walked into their camp at dawn. Zolthek continued. She was carrying a captured Scry weapon and wearing the armor she had taken from the guard she had defeated. She demanded to speak to That Score. When he came out, she threw the weapon at his feet. In the Scry language, she challenged him to single combat for the prisoners. She said if she won, he would release Wright and the others. If she lost, the Scry could have all the humans she had rescued. Zolthek's voice became very quiet. Duskvor laughed. Thought it was a joke. A tiny human medic challenging him. He accepted immediately. But Carter had been planning this for days. She had studied scry anatomy using her medical training. She knew their weak points. She knew exactly where their major blood vessels were located. She knew how their joints worked. The fight lasted 20 minutes. Datsfer was bigger and stronger, but Carter was faster and smarter. She used his size against him. When he charged, she dodged. When he swung his claws, she was already moving. She cut him in precise places that would cause maximum bleeding. In pain, the other scry watched in shock as their war chief grew weaker. Carter was not trying to overpower him. She was slowly cutting him apart with surgical precision. When Nats finally fell, Carter was barely wounded. She had a few scratches, but she was still standing. She looked at the other scray and reminded them of their chief's promise. They released the 3 prisoners. All 50 warriors watched as Carter led Wright and the others into the jungle. None of them tried to stop her. Zalthek finished his drink and set it down. Carter and her 11 rescued soldiers walked through 200 kilometers of jungle to reach the human base. It took them 8 days. She treated their injuries with supplies she had carried the entire time. She never lost a single soldier. When they reached safety, Carter's commanding officer asked her how she had done it. Her report was only 3 sentences long. She wrote, "Enemy underestimated human determination. Applied medical knowledge to combat situation. Mission accomplished." The old warrior stood up slowly. "That is why humans are dangerous. They do not just fight with weapons or strength. They fight with their minds. They use everything they know, everything they have learned, to find a way to win." Carter was a healer, but she became a hunter when she needed to. She studied her enemies like they were patients. She found their weaknesses and exploited them with the same precision she used to save lives. One of the young soldiers asked, "What happened to her after that?" Zalthek smiled grimly. "She was promoted to combat medic instructor. She taught other humans how to fight and heal at the same time." The scry still tell stories about the human ghost who walked into their strongest camp and defeated their greatest warrior. But the most frightening part of this story is not what Carter did. It is that she was just a medic. Imagine what their real soldiers can do. As Zalthek walked toward the door, he turned back one final time. Carter saved 11 lives that day. But she also taught the galaxy something important. Never assume a human is helpless just because they seem small or peaceful. They all carry the same fire inside them. They will all fight when they need to fight. The cantina remained silent long after he left, each alien thinking about the small human who had become a legend. 3 nights later, the young Kethri soldiers were waiting when Zalthek entered the cantina. Word had spread about his human stories, and tonight the place was packed with aliens from many different species. They all wanted to hear what the old warrior would say next. Zalthek looked around at the crowd and shook his head. So many listeners tonight. Very well. I will tell you about Ben Rodriguez and what happened at New Denver Colony. This story will show you that all humans are warriors, even the ones who have never held a weapon. The cantina grew quiet as Zalthek settled into his chair with a fresh drink. New Denver was a farming colony on the edge of human space. 300 people lived there. Most of them were families who had come to grow food for the war effort. They had farmers, engineers, teachers, children, old people. The only real soldier was Captain Ben Rodriguez, who commanded a security team of 6 men. It was a peaceful place. The colonists grew wheat and corn in huge fields. They raised cattle and chickens. Children played in the streets while their parents worked. No one expected trouble. Zalthek paused and took a drink. But the Zephyrian Empire was losing the war. They needed a victory to show their people that they were still strong. They decided to attack soft targets, places that could not fight back. The Zephyrian fleet arrived without warning. 12 warships carrying 2,000 shock troops. Expected to land, capture the colony, and broadcast their victory across the galaxy. It should have been easy. One of the young soldiers asked, "What did the humans do?" Rodriguez had maybe 10 minutes between detecting the ships and the first landing, Zalthek replied. He could have tried to evacuate. He could have surrendered. Instead, he did something that shocked everyone, including his own people. activated the colony's emergency broadcast system, and spoke to every person on New Denver. He told them the truth. The Zephyrian invasion force was coming. They could not escape. They could not hide. But they could fight. Zolthek's voice grew stronger. Rodriguez asked for volunteers. He said anyone who wanted to help defend the colony should report to the town center. Expected maybe 50 people to show up. 294 colonists came. That was everyone except the 6 smallest children who were hidden in the deep storage bunkers. The crowd in the cantina leaned forward. Even the bartender had stopped serving drinks. Rodriguez looked at his volunteers. He saw farmers and teachers and shopkeepers. He saw teenagers and grandparents. He saw people who had never fired a shot in anger. And he made them into an army in less than 4 hours. He sent teams to collect every weapon on the colony. Hunting rifles, construction tools, mining explosives, farming equipment. He had them drag tractors and harvesters into the streets to make barriers. He showed teenagers how to load ammunition, and old men how to throw grenades. Oh, but the most important thing Rodriguez did was organize them by families. Fathers and sons fought together. Mothers and daughters shared positions. He knew that humans fight harder when they are protecting the people they love. Zolthek took another drink. The Zephyrians landed expecting to face a few security guards. Instead, they found an entire town ready for war. The first wave hit the outer perimeter at dawn. 50 Zephyrian shock troops advancing toward the farming buildings. They walked into a trap. The colonists had turned the grain silos into sniper positions. Every window had a rifle barrel sticking out. The Zephyrians made it maybe 200 meters before the humans opened fire, but these were not professional soldiers. The farmers missed more shots than they hit. Zephyrians regrouped and charged the buildings. That was when Rodriguez showed his real plan. Zolthek stood up and walked around the table as he continued the story. He had rigged the farm buildings with explosives. When the Zephyrians got close enough, the colonists blew up their own property. Barns, equipment sheds, storage buildings. Everything went up in flames, taking most of the first wave with it. The Zephyrian commander was angry now. Sent 3 waves at once. It's 300 warriors attacking from different directions. This time they reached the town itself. The humans fell back to their second line of defense. Rodriguez had turned every building into a fortress. The colonists fought room by room, house by house. When they ran out of ammunition, they used kitchen knives and farming tools. I was monitoring the Zephyrian communications, Zolthek said quietly. Their officers were reporting things that made no sense. They said the humans were using children as ammunition runners. They said old women were throwing homemade bombs from bedroom windows. They said the entire town had gone insane. But Rodriguez was not insane. He was brilliant. He knew his people could not win a straight fight, so he made the Zephyrians pay. For every meter of ground, every house cost them soldiers. Every street cost them time. The fighting went on for 6 hours. The Zephyrians kept advancing, but they were taking terrible losses. Rodriguez moved from position to position, always appearing where the fighting was worst. He carried extra ammunition to his people and helped wounded colonists reach safety. Of the young Kethri asked, how many humans were left? By the 6th hour, maybe 60 colonists were still fighting, Zolthek replied. They had been pushed back to the town center. Rodriguez and his remaining people were surrounded in the community hall. The Zephyrian commander offered terms. Surrender now, and the survivors would be treated as prisoners of war. Keep fighting, and everyone would die. Zolthek smiled grimly. Rodriguez's answer was broadcast on all frequencies, so the whole galaxy could hear it. He said, come and take us. The final assault began at sunset. The Zephyrians had over 1,000 warriors left. They surrounded the community hall and attacked from all sides at once. Rodriguez and his people were out of ammunition for their rifles. They fought with pistols and shotguns and whatever they could find. When those ran out, they used chairs and tables and kitchen equipment. I will never forget the reports from that battle. Zephyrian officers said the humans fought like wild animals. They said Rodriguez was everywhere at once, inspiring his people even as the building collapsed around them. In the end, only 12 humans were still alive when the relief fleet arrived. Rodriguez was one of them. He was wounded in 4 places. and had been fighting for 8 straight hours. But he was still standing when the rescue ships landed. Zolthek sat back down and finished his drink. The Zephyrians lost over 800 warriors taking a farming colony. Their commander was so ashamed that he committed ritual suicide. The attack that was supposed to show Zephyrian strength instead showed the galaxy that attacking humans was always expensive. But the real lesson of New Denver was not about military tactics. It was about what humans become when their families are threatened. Rodriguez did not create soldiers that day, revealed that every human is already a soldier inside. The old warrior looked around at the silent crowd. After the battle, reporters asked Rodriguez how farmers and teachers had fought so hard. He said something I will never forget, said, "They were not fighting for the colony. They were fighting for their children." There is no force in the universe stronger than a human protecting their family. The Zephyrians learned this lesson too late. They never attacked another human civilian target. They realized that there are no human civilians, only humans who have not been threatened yet. Zolthek stood up to leave. Rodriguez was promoted to general after New Denver. He now commands an entire battle fleet. But he still carries the same rifle he used in the community hall. It has 93 notches carved in the stock. The colony was rebuilt within a year. The new town center has a memorial with the names of everyone who fought. But the most important thing written there is Rodriguez's message to future enemies. It says, "This is what happens when you threaten human families. Do not make the same mistake twice." As the old warrior walked toward the door, the cantina remained completely silent. Everyone was thinking about farmers who became warriors and teachers who threw grenades and children carried ammunition while their town burned around them. The humans had shown once again they were different from every other species. In the galaxy, they did not just fight for territory or resources. They fought for each other, and that made them unstoppable. By the 4th night, aliens from across the station were coming to hear Zolthek's stories. Cantina owner had to move tables to make room for everyone. Kethri, Veltar, Skray, and even a few Zephyrians sat together, all wanting to hear. About human warfare? Zolthek looked at the mixed crowd and nodded grimly. "Tonight, I will tell you the most frightening story of all. This is about Commander Amy Brooks and what she did with a dying ship. After this tale, you will understand why humans are most dangerous when they have nothing left to lose." The old warrior waited until everyone was quiet before he began. The UFS Defiance was a human battleship. Not the biggest or the newest, but it had a good crew and a captain who knew how to fight. Commander Amy Brooks had been in space for 15 years. She was calm under pressure and smart about tactics. The ship was part of a battle group attacking a Korthani stronghold. The Korthani are tough fighters. They build ships like fortresses and never retreat from a fight. Their dreadnoughts are some of the most feared vessels in the galaxy. Zolthek took a drink and continued. The battle was going badly for the humans. 3 Korthani dreadnoughts had broken through the human line. The Defiance moved to intercept them, but the ship took a direct hit from a plasma cannon. Explosion tore through the engine room and main power grid. Life support failed on most decks. The artificial gravity stopped working. Worst of all, the ship's communication system was destroyed. The Defiance was cut off from the rest of the fleet. One of the listening aliens asked how many crews survived. 23 people out of 400, Zolthek replied. Brooks was in the command center when the explosion happened. She was thrown against a wall and broke 2 ribs, but she was alive. She looked around and saw her bridge crew floating in the darkness. The first thing Brooks did was count her people. 23 survivors scattered across different sections of the ship. They had emergency air supplies that would last maybe 6 hours. The ship was drifting powerless in space. Any other captain would have tried to send a distress signal. Brooks did something different. She contacted her surviving crew on short-range communicators and told them to prepare for battle. The crowd looked confused. The Veltar officer spoke. Battle? The ship was dead in space. That is what made Brooks dangerous, Zolthek explained. She saw opportunity where others saw disaster. The Korthani ships were moving closer to investigate the wreck. They thought the Defiance was finished. They planned to board the ship and capture any survivors. Brooks had maybe 30 minutes before the first boarding party arrived. She used that time to turn her dead ship into a weapon. Zolthek stood up and walked around as he told the story. First, she had her people collect all the emergency air tanks they could find. She told them to put on their spacesuits and prepare for total vacuum. Then she did something that shocked even her own crew. She vented the ship's atmosphere. All of it. She opened every airlock and emergency hatch. The Defiance became a ghost ship floating in the void. But Brooks was not done. She had her engineering team crawl through the maintenance tunnels too. Reach the gravity generators. These machines were still working on backup power. Brooks had them reprogrammed to work as weapons. When the first Korthani boarding party entered the ship, they expected to find air and gravity. Instead, they found themselves floating helplessly in empty corridors. Their magnetic boots did not work because Brooks had cut power to the deck plating. That was when the humans attacked. Zolthek's voice dropped to a whisper. Imagine Korthani. Warriors floating in zero gravity, unable to control their movement. Then imagine humans appearing from hidden passages, moving through the darkness like ghosts. Brooks and her crew had trained for zero-gravity combat. They knew how to use handholds and wall-mounted equipment to move quickly through the ship. The Korthani did not. The humans picked off the boarders one by one. They would appear from an air vent, eliminate an enemy, and disappear again. The Korthani could not coordinate their defense because they were floating helplessly. But more. Boarding parties kept coming. The Korthani commanders were angry that their first team had been defeated. They sent 50 warriors in the second wave. Zolthek sat back down and took another drink. Brooks was ready for them. She had positioned her people throughout the ship. When the second boarding party entered, she activated the gravity generators. In a specific sequence, suddenly gravity would slam the Korthani against the floor, then it would reverse and throw them against the ceiling. Then it would spin them sideways into the walls. Brooks was using the ship's own systems to throw the boarders around like toys. While the Korthani were being crushed and spun by changing gravity, the humans attacked again. They moved through maintenance tunnels that were too small for Korthani. Bodies. They appeared behind enemy positions and disappeared before return fire could hit them. The aliens in the cantina were completely silent now. Even the Korthani representatives looked uncomfortable. The third boarding party never made it inside the ship. Zolthek continued. Brooks had her people rig explosives around the main airlocks. When the Korthani docking ships attached to the hull, she blew the charges. The explosions tore holes in both ships. The Korthani boarders were sucked out into space. Their docking craft were destroyed, but Brooks was still not finished. She realized that her ship was going to be destroyed eventually. The Korthani dreadnoughts were moving closer, preparing to blast the Defiance apart, so she decided to take them with her. Zolthek's voice became very quiet. Brooks had her engineers crawl down to the reactor room. The main reactor was damaged, but still working. She told them to remove all the safety controls. She was planning to overload the reactor and turn her ship into a bomb. One of the young Kethri soldiers gasped, but that would kill her crew. 2. Brooks called her 23 survivors to the command center. Zolthek replied. She told them what she planned to do. She said anyone who wanted to try escaping in the emergency pods could go. She would not order them to die with the ship. All 23 chose to stay. Brooks spent the next 4 hours preparing her final attack. She had the ship's computers calculate the exact moment when all 3 Korthani dreadnoughts would be close enough to be caught in the explosion. She used the ship's maneuvering thrusters to position the Defiance perfectly. Korthani thought she was just drifting helplessly, but Brooks was actually steering toward them. When the moment came, Brooks activated the reactor overload. She had 30 seconds before the explosion. She used that time to broadcast a message to the Korthani fleet. Zolthek stood up again and looked around at the crowd. She said, "This is Commander Amy Brooks of the UFS Defiance. You boarded our ship. You killed our crew. Now you will learn why humans never surrender." The explosion destroyed all 3 Korthani dreadnoughts, also crippled 2 other ships, and damaged a third. The Defiance took 6 enemy vessels with her when she died. But the most terrifying part was what happened next. The human rescue ships arrived an hour later. They found the wreckage and started searching for survivors. They did not expect to find anyone alive. But Brooks and her crew had used the explosion to mask their escape. At the last second, they had launched themselves in emergency pods. The blast had hidden their heat signatures from Kortheni sensors. All 24 humans were found floating in space, alive and waiting for pickup. The cantina was completely silent. Everyone was staring at Zelthek with shock and fear. Brooks was promoted to admiral after that battle, the old warrior continued. The Kortheni still tell stories about the ghost ship that turned defeat into victory. They say the dead can fight, and humans prove it. But the real lesson is about human nature. Brooks could have surrendered. She could have tried to negotiate. Instead, she turned her dying ship into a weapon and used her crew's deaths to destroy her enemies. That is why we fear humans most when they are losing. Other species fight to live. Humans fight to win, even if winning means dying. Finished his drink and stood up. Brooks still commands a battle fleet somewhere on the front lines. The Kortheni refused to fight her ships directly. They say she is a ghost admiral who commands ghost ships filled with crews that should already be dead. Remember this story when you face humans in battle. They do not fear death. They use it as another weapon in their arsenal. As the old warrior left the cantina, the crowd remained silent for a long time. They were all thinking about the human commander who had turned defeat into victory and death into a weapon. On the fifth night, the cantina was packed beyond capacity. Word had spread across 3 star systems about HFY Stories. Military officers, traders, diplomats, and civilians had all come to hear the final tale. Some stood against the walls because there were no more seats. Zelthek looked at the crowd and saw representatives from every major species in the galaxy. Even some humans had come, sitting quietly in the back corner. The old warrior nodded too. Then before he began, "Tonight I will tell you about the battle that changed everything," he said. "This is about General Ryan Hayes and the day humans proved they belonged among the galactic powers. After this story, you will understand why the galaxy will never be the same." The cantina fell silent. Even the air recycling systems seemed quieter. The war had been going badly for the Grand Alliance. Zelthek began. The hegemony forces controlled most of the major trade routes. They had captured the Proxima Gate, which connected 4 different star systems. Without that gate, Alliance ships had to travel twice as far to reach the front lines. The Alliance was ready to surrender. Food shipments were not getting through. Medical supplies were running low. Some member species were already talking about making peace with the hegemony. That was when the humans offered to lead one final attack. A Veltar officer in the crowd spoke up. But humans had only been in space for 50 years. Why would the Alliance trust them with such an important mission? Zelthek smiled grimly. Because they had no choice. Every other species had tried to retake Proxima Gate and failed. Humans said they had a plan that would work. Alliance Council was desperate enough to listen. General Ryan Hayes was chosen to command the operation. He was young for such responsibility, only 42 years old. But he had studied every battle the Alliance had fought. He understood why all the previous attacks had failed. The hegemony expected a direct assault. They had positioned their best ships around the gate. They had built defense platforms and minefields. They were ready for anything the Alliance could throw at them. Hayes planned something different. Instead of attacking Proxima Gate directly, he would attack 5 different targets at the same time. The crowd looked confused. Scray Warrior asked, how could he attack 5 places with one fleet? That was the genius of Hayes' plan, Zelthek explained. He did not use one fleet. He convinced the Alliance to give him ships from every member species. Kethri cruisers, Veltar destroyers, Scray fighters, even some captured hegemony vessels. Hayes divided these ships into 5 separate groups. Each group would attack a different hegemony stronghold. The attacks would happen at the same time, forcing the enemy to split their forces. But the real target was still Proxima Gate. Hayes kept the best ships for that assault. He knew the hegemony would not expect humans to attack the strongest position with the smallest force. Took a drink and continued. The day of the battle, Hayes broadcast a message to every ship in his fleet. He said, Today we fight not just for the Alliance, but for the idea that free species can stand together against tyranny. Some of us will not survive this day, but our sacrifice will ensure that freedom survives. The 5 attacks began at exactly the same moment. Hegemony commanders received reports of battles across their entire territory. They had to send reinforcements to protect their bases. That was when Hayes made his move. While the enemy was distracted, he led his assault force toward Proxima Gate. 50 ships against 120 hegemony vessels. The old warrior stood up and walked around the table. Hayes knew he was outnumbered. He knew most of his ships would be destroyed. But he also knew something the hegemony did not understand about humans. "What was that?" asked one of the young Kethri soldiers. "Humans do not fight just to win," Zelthek replied. "They fight for ideas. They fight for principles. They fight because they believe their cause is right. It makes them willing to do things other species would never consider." When the battle began, Hayes ordered his ships to ignore enemy fire and focus only on the gate itself. Alliance vessels flew straight into hegemony gun positions. They took terrible damage, but they kept moving forward. The hegemony commanders could not understand what they were seeing. Alliance ships were not trying to win the battle. They were trying to sacrifice themselves to damage the gate. Though Zelthek's voice grew stronger. Hayes was on the flagship, a human dreadnought called the Liberty. He led the charge directly into the heart of the enemy formation. His ship took hit after hit, but he never changed course. The bridge was damaged. The engines were failing. Half his crew was dead or wounded. But Hayes kept giving orders, kept coordinating the attack, kept pushing forward. When the Liberty's weapons stopped working, Hayes rammed the ship into the gate's main control station. The explosion destroyed both the station and his ship, but it also crippled the gate's defenses. That was the signal for the final phase of the attack. The surviving Alliance ships, now only 20 vessels, converged on the gate from all directions. They poured everything they had into the remaining hegemony forces. The cantina was completely quiet now. Everyone was hanging on every word. The battle lasted 14 hours, Zelthek continued. By the end, only 8 Alliance ships were still operational, but the gate was back in Alliance hands. The hegemony fleet was destroyed. Hayes was found in the wreckage of the Liberty's command center. He was barely alive, but he was still trying to give orders over a broken communicator. Last words, before losing consciousness, were "Mission accomplished. Gate secured." The victory at Proxima Gate changed everything. Supply lines were restored. Reinforcements could reach the front lines. The Alliance began pushing the hegemony back across multiple sectors. But more importantly, the galaxy saw what humans were capable of. They saw a species that would sacrifice everything for their beliefs. They saw warriors who fought not for conquest or glory, but for the idea that all species should be free. Zelthek walked back to his table and sat down. Hayes recovered from his injuries and was promoted to Supreme Commander of all Alliance forces. Under his leadership, the war was won within 2 years. But the real victory was not military. Was philosophical. Humans had shown the galaxy a new way to fight. They proved that courage and determination could overcome superior numbers and technology. The hegemony surrendered because they realized they could not defeat an enemy that would not accept defeat. How do you conquer a species that sees death as just another tactical option? The old warrior looked around at the silent crowd. Today, 50 years later, humans are considered one of the great military powers of the galaxy, not because they have the best ships or the strongest weapons, but because they fight differently than everyone else. They fight for ideas that cannot be killed. They fight for principles that cannot be captured. They fight for beliefs that grow stronger under pressure. Other species fight until they cannot win. Humans fight until they cannot lose. There is a difference, and that difference has changed the galaxy forever. Zelthek stood up one final time. Stories about 5 different humans: Morrison, Carter, Rodriguez, Brooks, and Hayes. Each of them faced impossible odds. Each of them found a way to turn defeat into victory, but they were not special humans. They were ordinary humans doing what their species does. They were examples of what every human carries inside them. That is why we respect them. That is why we fear them. That is why the galaxy will never be the same. The old warrior looked directly at the humans sitting in the back corner. Your species has taught us all a lesson. You have shown us that the size of the fight in the warrior matters more than the size of the warrior in the fight. You have earned your place among the stars, not through conquest, but through courage, not through domination, but through determination, not through fear, but through the willingness to sacrifice everything for what you believe is right. Toward the door, the entire cantina stood up in respectful silence. Aliens from dozens of species watched the old warrior leave, each of them thinking about the humans among them and the fire that burned in every human heart. The humans in the back corner nodded quietly to the crowd and left without saying a word. They did not need to speak. Their presence was a reminder enough of what their species had accomplished. The cantina remained quiet for a long time after they were gone. Everyone was thinking about courage and sacrifice and the species that had changed the galaxy simply by refusing to give up.